let me introduce myself. My name's Simon Levy. I'm an ophthalmologist. That means I do eye surgery. Ophthalmologists tend to specialize in a certain specific part of the eye, and in my case that's anterior segment. That means the front of the eye. So most of what I do is cataract surgery, specifically something that's nowadays known as refractive cataract surgery. What that means is that one removes the cataract and offers the patient the opportunity to be free of glasses afterward. I also do other kinds of refractive surgery, especially laser eye surgery. I do cornea transplantation, and I do a lot of work with eye surface disorders, specifically dry eye and a condition called blepharitis that's very common, especially in seniors. So I work in both the state and private sectors. My National Health Service job is at a hospital in North London called Central Middlesex Hospital. And my private practice is mostly at a place called Spy Hospital Bushy, which is also in North London. So let me say that it was a pleasure to meet Brian when he came with his wife to my clinic at Spy Hospital Bushy. Brian presented the classic symptoms of people who have cataract. So the quality of his vision just was not as it had been, was not what he'd been used to for his adult life, and was not what he was wanting. So when Brian came to my clinic with his wife, who'd been a previous cataract surgery patient of mine, it was a pleasure to see them both again. Brian came with symptoms typical of people who have cataract. What I needed to know was how much those symptoms were bothering him, what impact they were having on the quality of his life, and whether he felt that the time had come to have something done about them. The other aspect of a consultation with a new patient is to find out more about the person themselves. You need to know what makes them tick just a little bit, what their lifestyle's like, what kind of needs they have visually, and also very important, what their aspirations are. People vary enormously in what they're hoping to get out of cataract surgery, and it's really important to understand what an individual patient wants from the process. There's a lot of very sophisticated equipment involved with cataract surgery, which make exquisitely accurate and detailed measurements of the patient's eyes. And from those measurements, one can ascertain what lens implants will be useful, will be ideal for the patient to have. Before one gets to the stage of talking to the patient about what they would like to have in terms of replacement lenses, it's necessary to actually confirm their diagnosis. And that means examining them on something called a slit lamp. This is a device that allows you to look into the patient's eyes and find out whether they do or don't have cataract and how much. When you've done that, you're in a position to explain to the patient what the diagnosis is, help them understand why that's impacting their vision, and then, very important, have that conversation with them that will tell them what kind of replacement lens options there are.
My name is Brian Hamilton. I recently have had surgery with Dr. Simon Levy for my eyes, and I'm very, very grateful that I've had that done. I had a subconscious knowledge of my driving, where I thought that my eyesight was okay and I was driving very properly, very correctly. But deep down I thought, there's a bit of luck in this. And it was then that, having seen what the transformation in Jane's lifestyle without the glasses and having new lenses, I decided that perhaps it would be a good idea for me to have that done. And in consequence, I made an appointment with Simon Levy and went along and took his advice.
So when I had examined Brian, when he'd had his diagnostics, when it was clear that the diagnosis was cataract and he has nothing else wrong with his eyes, fortunately, I was in a position to firstly counsel him about cataract In general terms, patients need to understand what a cataract is, why it's impacting their vision, why they have the symptoms that they do, and what the surgical procedure is that will correct that problem. So I talked Brian through the nuts and bolts of cataract surgery. I have printed material to show the patients. I showed Brian exactly where a cataract is inside the eye and how the technology to remove it works. At that point, the conversation turns to lens implants. What I'd like to explain is that when cataract surgery is done, the natural lens of the eye, which has become cloudy and an impediment to clear vision, that natural lens is removed. A new lens has to be put into its place. It's fine to take a lens away, a cloudy natural lens, but it's not fine to leave the patient without a lens afterwards. So they'll need a new lens. The technology available today provides for a wide variety of extremely sophisticated lenses, which have different vision correcting profiles after the surgery. What's needed is to match the patient and the patient's eyes to the specific lenses. Lenses have to be customized. The last thing a patient wants is a one-size-fits-all approach. A lens has to be customized so that the fit and the match between the lens and the patient's eye is as tight as possible, and so that the performance of the lens matches the patient's visual aspirations as closely as possible. Because the concept to make clear to the patient is that different lenses have tremendously different vision profiles after the surgery.
Before the operation, my eyesight influenced how I did my life. I had to have, from boots, a pair of glasses for the lower office, the top office, the car, and it was, it was uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable is the wrong word. It was just, it was always stressful looking for the glasses, and also, my eyesight, wasn't as clear as it ought to be, and even in golf, particularly in golf, and it may sound a little boastful, but I can hit it over 200 yards, and I couldn't see the bloody thing after it leaves about 100 yards, and that was the one thing too that made me think as well, because my wife could say, "Oh, your ball's up there," and I couldn't even see what direction. So there was quite a lot of influence in not having good vision that affected my life, and without going into lots of details, but virtually everything actually. The initial testing of my eyes by Simon Levy's colleague was very straightforward and very, I suppose, almost intense. But then with that information, Simon Levy would say, "This is what you can do," etc., etc. And I had made my mind up to have it done because of various. I had made my mind up to have it done simply because the transformation in Jane, my wife's life, it was just, it was a no-brainer, to be very blunt.
So when Brian had his diagnostics, had his diagnosis, next step was to talk to him about what kind of lens implant he'd like to replace the natural lens that had been removed during the surgery. Brian was suitable for several different kinds of lenses. Specifically, he could have had a single vision lens, an extended depth of focus lens, or a full-powered multifocal lens. Each of these have dramatically different vision profiles. I explained to Brian what each of those lenses would achieve in terms of dependence, or conversely independence, on glasses after the surgery. Single vision lenses tend to focus for distance only. That'll be something like driving, but patients tend not to be able to see the sat-nav in their car or the dashboard of their car. Extended depth of focus lenses have a much wider depth of focus, so they focus distance, They focus middle, and that means the sat nav and the dashboard of your car and desktop computers and dinner down on the table. So it's a very important distance, that middle distance. And they give some help with reading. So larger, easier print, patients can normally read without reading glasses. With an extended depth of focus, they will sometimes need readers for more demanding near tasks, like prolonged reading, for example. The final choice would have been a full-powered multifocal. This has the greatest depth of focus of any of the lenses, which encompasses distance, intermediate, and near. So these patients are aiming to be fully independent of glasses. But I think it's important to mention the drawback of full-powered multifocals, which for some patients is a problem, and that is that when they drive at night, they're likely to have some glare from oncoming headlamps. For some patients, that's really undesirable. Brian happens to be an avid nighttime driver. He likes to speed around in those sports cars. And for him, full-powered multifocals would therefore have been not an ideal choice.
He advised me to have long distance and middle distance and not reading, because if you have reading at night time, you'll have a fuzz. And as Jane doesn't drive in the evening, then it wasn't a problem for her, but it would be a problem for me. So I just had the other done. Jane had 2 or 3 weeks of a bit of uncomfortability while the eyes settled down. My uncomfortability lasted about a week, and today I have absolutely no problem whatsoever.
The extended depth of focus, EDOF for short, lens that I like to use is made by a company called Teleon. The specific lens is called the LENTIS Comfort. It's a very sophisticated design. It's very friendly and straightforward to use. It hardly ever causes problems. Specifically, it tends not to cause glare at night. The sophisticated design I mentioned incorporates technically a 1.5 diopter reading addition into the lens. So patients can see distance, but they can also see middle and sometimes near, as though they were wearing a 1.5+ pair of reading glasses, except that they're not. That reading addition is incorporated into the lens implant. It's inside their eyes, and they don't need to reach for the glasses every time they're doing something like looking at the dashboard of their car. Let me show you the design, the anatomy, if you will, of this lens, the LENTIS Comfort. It's made of plastic. In real life, it's flexible, so it can be folded up and injected into the eye through an ultra small incision. You can see it's a kind of oblong shape. We call that a plate haptic design. The optical zone is in the center. It's not easy to see, but the top half of the optical zone is focused for distance, and the bottom half is focused for intermediate and, to some extent, near distances. There's some space at the top and the bottom. This is a design enabling the surgeon to manipulate the lens inside the eye. The top and the bottom of the lens fit into the space created by removing the cataract. Lock it into place and keep it still when it's inside the eye. It's worth saying that this lens is invisible once it's inside the eye. No one can see it, and the patients can't feel it. They'll have no sensation of it being there at all.
Well, I mean, any surgery, yes, I had concerns, but you know, the concerns were weak enough to let me do it. Simple as that.
So let me explain the nuts and bolts of cataract surgery. First thing that needs to be done is to dilate the patient's pupil. That provides access to the natural lens of the eye behind the pupil, and it's the natural lens that's become cloudy and the natural lens that needs to be removed. Some small incisions need to be made into the eye, specifically 2 that are sub 1 millimeter wide. They're called the side incisions or paracenteses, and the main incision to allow the cataract probe into the eye That incision is, well, it varies, but let's say about 2 millimeters wide. I usually make an incision 2.4 millimeters wide. Into the eye then goes a bulking agent called a viscoelastic. This is a clear gel that maintains the normal anatomy of the eye whilst it's being operated on. Next thing the surgeon needs to do is to remove the capsule of the cataract. The capsule is the wrapping. Imagine the cataract as being like a Smartie. There's chocolate inside and a coating on the outside. The capsule's like the coating. Some of that has to be removed to allow access to the chocolate. When the capsule's being removed, that's done with a very, very delicate pair of tweezers, forceps we call them. Then the surgeon will be looking at the cataract itself and will have access to it for his micro instruments. Next thing that goes into the eye is that cataract surgery probe. The probe is extremely small. I've already said it's about 2 millimeters wide. It's an ultrasound device. The very tip vibrates extremely quickly. I should say that the device behind the probe, the cataract surgery machine that makes the probe work, is quite big, but that's outside the eye. It's big and sophisticated, actually. The bit that goes inside the eye, extremely keyhole, about 2 millimeters wide, vibrates extremely rapidly, extremely subtly. What that will do is to melt the cataract, turn it into something analogous to an emulsion. The center of the probe is hollow and has suction. So that emulsion is then sucked out of the eye and into a disposal device. That process will leave the patient with no cataract, but also, very important, no natural lens, because cataract is a clouding of the natural lens. If the cataract's been removed, so has the natural lens. Now that's not a problem, so long as a new lens is put into the space that was once occupied by the natural lens that had become cloudy through cataract. At this point, the technology of lens implant replacement reaches its pinnacle. The lens that's been chosen is placed into an injector, folded up. They're made of plastic. They're highly malleable and flexible. You can fold a lens that's got an optical zone of 6 millimeters into a device that will inject the lens into the eye through that incision of about 2 millimeters, which is really quite extraordinary. The lens implants enable the lens to be inserted into the eye in a remarkably gentle, atraumatic, to use the medical term, way. The lens will sit into the space previously occupied by, the new lens I should say, will sit into the space previously occupied by the cataract. It has arms on it. They're called haptics. They spread outwards, lock the lens in place and keep it in position. The good thing, it will outlast any patient. Lenses last for an indefinite period, so the patients can be sure that they're most unlikely ever to need a new lens. And that's something that can't be said of some replacement surgeries. Hips and knees tend to wear out. Cataract surgeries don't.
It wasn't a relaxed experience, but it wasn't an uncomfortable experience, you know, and I had very little fear because, you know, one eye was being done and then later, a week or so later, I'd have the second eye done. So there's complications. I still would have vision. So there was an element of fear and an element of feeling a bit apprehensive, but it didn't stop me. I didn't even think of making me stop not doing it.
Brian was a great patient. His surgery went really well. It was over quickly, all done with no problems.
Well, I think other than the mental torment of fear, it was very straightforward. And, you know, it's like under half an hour, which is no big deal. And, you know, you get knocked out a little bit. It was fine.
One of the joys of cataract surgery is how quickly patients and their eyes recover from the operation. It is a really gentle keyhole procedure, and generally speaking, patients are back to something approximating a normal life within 2 or 3 days of the operation. Some things need to be deferred a little bit. Swimming, for example, I say to the patients, you shouldn't do that for a couple of weeks. But if patients are working, they can go back to work for most jobs within a few days of the operation.
It was interesting, because I could see things clearly, like 200 yards away, that I'd never, it was a blur before, and all of a sudden I could see the leaves on trees 200 yards away, which for me was quite incredible.
So I review my cataract surgery patients within a few days of the operation, then all being well, usually about 6 weeks later, when they can be discharged. The purpose of cataract surgery follow-up is to be certain that the lens implant is in precisely the right place, that it's doing the job that it's supposed to be doing, and that the eye is healing well from the surgery.
It stopped me hiding behind my age for doing things, and it's really like now I look around, everything's as clear as crystal, the background and through the house and whatnot. It's it's transformed my life. There's no question about that.
It was a real pleasure to look after Brian. He was a great patient, and he had a fantastic result. He was really happy with his operation and what he could see afterwards, mostly independent from glasses, no problems. And really it was just an ideal match between the patient's lifestyle and the lens implant. It was great.
From my point of view, it's a great privilege to be able to have this done in my life. It's a gift that I'm very grateful to be able to have.